The phone rang as I was finishing breakfast. It was an old machine with a disc. I refused to change it for something more modern, despite my son's constant taunts. Pearl always said that phone would bring us luck, but luck left our house with her 5 years ago. Hello? My voice sounded hoarse. It was unusual to talk in the morning, as no one usually did. Dad? It's Ebner. I straightened involuntarily, as if my son could see me through the phone line. Ebner rarely called, only when he needed something. Good morning, son. Listen, it's my birthday this Saturday, remember? Ebner didn't wait for me to answer. We're having a family dinner. Ernestina insists you come. I knew that wasn't true. My sister-in-law Ernestina never insisted on my presence. Rather, she was the one who suggested that I not be invited, and Ebner decided that my absence would raise too many questions from the rest of the family. Of course I remember your birthday, I replied. 42 is a good age. 43, Father. I'm turning 43. Oh yes. I'm sorry. I had indeed forgotten. After 60, the years start to merge and the details slip away faster than I'd like. So you'll come? 6 o'clock tonight. I could sense the impatience in his voice. He wanted to get the conversation over with. Of course I'll be there. Can I get you anything? I don't need anything, Ebner said. Just, be on time. I promised not to be late, and we said goodbye. Ebner hung up first as usual. Setting aside my unfinished toast, I looked out the window at the gray April sky of Castleton. Typical weather for our town, neither winter nor spring, as if nature hadn't yet decided what to do next. That's exactly how I've been feeling for the past few years. Being invited to my son's birthday party didn't make me happy, only anxious. The last 3 family gatherings had ended the same way. Ebner would strike up a conversation about my house. It's too big for one person, too expensive to maintain. You could move to a decent senior place where you'll be taken care of. I knew what was behind those words. Ebner needed money. Money from the sale of the house I'd built with my own hands for Pearl 40 years ago. I'd lived in Castleton all my life, 38 years delivering mail on the same streets I grew up on, knew every dog, every wicket, every story behind closed doors. People trusted me with their letters, cards, packages, the little and big joys of their lives. I was part of this town, and the town was part of me. The house on Elm Street was the last thing that connected me to the past, Pearl. With the times when the kids were small and looked at me with respect instead of poorly concealed irritation. I went up to the second floor, to the bedroom I'd once shared with my wife. I opened the closet and took a long look at the dark blue suit I'd bought for Pearl's funeral and had worn only a few times since. I had to see if it was too loose. I'd lost a lot of weight in the last year. It hung next to Pearl's summer dresses, which I'd never gotten around to putting away. Her scent had long since faded, but sometimes I thought I could still smell it, the faint scent of lavender and vanilla. The doctor had said it was normal, that memory could play such jokes. Trying on the suit, I found that it had actually gotten big. The pants were only held on by the belt, and the jacket dangled around my shoulders like a hanger. Pearl would have said I looked like a scarecrow from Farmer Higgins' cornfield. The thought made me smile. I carefully hung the suit back in the closet. Wearing it to my son's birthday party would be weird, too formal. Ebner would probably think I was going out of my mind. As it was, he thought I was almost senile, though I retained my clarity of thought and firmness of hand in my 68 years. I may have forgotten little things, but in the important things my mind remained sharp. On Saturday, I woke up early at first light, a habit developed through decades of postal service. After a breakfast of oatmeal, Pearl always said it was good for the heart, I spent the morning fiddling in the garden. The ground had warmed up enough to plant early vegetables. This year, I decided to try growing broccoli. Pearl loved it, and I never learned how, but the grandchildren, especially the youngest, Lydia, ate it with gusto. By noon, I was done with the beds, and after washing my hands, I made myself a ham sandwich. I turned on the radio, an old model that Pearl and I had bought back in the 80s. It was broadcasting news about some political scandal in the Capitol, but I didn't care much for it. Politics had always seemed a dirty business to me, and in recent years especially so. After dinner, I decided to take a nap. It was going to be a tiring evening. I lay on the couch in the living room under a picture of Pearl and me in front of Lake Champlain. That trip to Vermont had been our last vacation together, a year before her diagnosis. I woke up to the alarm clock ringing at 4 o'clock. Showering and shaving took half an hour. I'd gotten slower with age, though I'd never admit it. I chose the dark brown slacks and plaid shirt Pearl had given me for our last Christmas together. I decided not to wear a tie. Ebner would find something to complain about anyway. At 5 o'clock I was ready, but it was too early to go out. Ebner's house was on the other side of Castleton, in a new neighborhood where young families with money were settling. 20 minutes by car, no more. I sat in the chair by the window, the same one where Pearl liked to knit in the evenings, and looked out at the street where the neighborhood kids were playing. My kids used to run down that street too, once upon a time. Willow was always serious, responsible, like a little adult. Ebner, on the other hand, was loud and demanding. Pearl said he'd inherited my stubbornness, but I saw him more as my father, a man who always knew what he wanted and wasn't shy about taking it. At 15 minutes past 6, I left the house, locking the door carefully. My old Ford started on the third try, another reason for Ebner's taunts. "You're driving scrap metal, Father. It's dangerous. One day it's going to stall in the middle of the road, and what are you going to do?" But the car was reliable despite its age, and so was I. The drive to my son's house was familiar but unpleasant. Every time I drove past new houses with perfect lawns and identical mailboxes, I felt like a stranger. Castleton was changing, becoming part of the big world, losing its character and coziness. Perhaps it was just senile grumpiness, but I missed the town of my youth. As I pulled up to Ebner's house, a 2-story brick building with columns at the entrance. Why do you need columns in Castleton, where the tallest building is the 3-story City Hall? I noticed several unfamiliar cars, so there would be other guests. This reassured me a little. With strangers around, Ebner was unlikely to press me with his ideas about selling the house. I parked behind a silver minivan that looked like it belonged to Willow and her husband Dexter. So Ebner's sister was already here. We hadn't seen each other much lately. She lived in Portland, 3 hours away, and was busy working for an insurance company. Willow had always been kinder to her old dad than Ebner, though she too felt I should move on after Pearl's death. I slowly got out of the car, feeling my back aching after the half-hour drive. I pulled a small package out of the back seat, a gift for Ebner, my father's old silver cufflinks. Not that my son had ever worn them, but it was a family heirloom, and I tried to follow tradition. The front door opened before I even rang the bell. On the doorstep stood Lydia, my 10-year-old granddaughter, with a wide smile exposing her new adult teeth, still too big for her baby face. "Grandpa!" She threw herself around my neck, almost knocking the cane out of my hand. I hugged her with one arm, feeling the warmth and sincerity that was so lacking in relationships with adult children. "Hello, Lydia. How is my favorite granddaughter?" "I'm your only granddaughter, Grandpa," she laughed, taking my hand and leading me into the house. In the spacious hallway smelled something spicy and sweet. Probably Ernestina was preparing her special apple pie. There were voices and muffled laughter coming from the living room. Lydia tugged at my sleeve. "You know what, Grandpa? I've lost another tooth. Look!" She opened her mouth wide, showing the empty space between her bottom teeth. "Has the tooth fairy come yet?" I asked, taking off my jacket. "Dad, stop filling her head with those fairy tales." Ebner appeared in the living room doorway, tall with a noticeable gray in his hair but still slim and trim. "Hello, Father, you're just in time." He said it as if he expected me to be late. I nodded, handing him the package. "Happy birthday, son." Ebner took the gift with a barely perceptible grimace. He'd never been able to hide his emotions, even as a child. "Thank you," he said without much enthusiasm. "Come on in. Everyone's already gathered." I followed him into the living room where the sofas and armchairs were filled with guests. Willow immediately came up to meet me, giving me a hug and a kiss on the cheek. She smelled like some kind of expensive perfume, not like Pearl, who preferred plain lavender water. "Papa, I'm so glad to see you." Her eyes, so like her mother's, glowed with genuine warmth. "You look well." It was a lie, of course. I knew what I looked like: old, thin, with wrinkles that had gotten deeper since Pearl's death. But a lie like that felt good. "You too, daughter," I replied, and it was the truth. Willow had always been beautiful, even as a teenager, when most kids go through an awkward phase. Dexter, her husband, shook my hand, firmly, but without being overly forceful. He was a good man, an accountant, quiet and reliable. Pearl approved of him, which was the highest praise. "Hello, Mr. Lamston," he said with a smile. "How are you?" "Not bad for an old man," I said, sitting down in the chair he offered me. I knew the other guests vaguely, a couple of Ebner's business friends, neighbors whose names kept slipping my mind. They nodded politely at me, but made no conversation. I was a stranger at this party, despite my family ties. Ernestina appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. My sister-in-law was an attractive woman, not a beauty but with correct features and a good figure, which she had retained after 2 pregnancies. Her brown hair was gathered into a neat bun, and a polite smile played on her lips that didn't reach her eyes. "Hello, Waird." She never called me daddy or father, only by my first name, as if I were just an acquaintance, not her husband's father. "I'm glad you could make it." I nodded, accepting the wine glass she held out to me. "Thank you for the invitation, Ernestina. It's always so cozy at your place." That was a lie, too. Ebner and Ernestina's house was never cozy. Too perfect, too sterile, like an interior design magazine. Not a single book out of place, not a single picture that wasn't perfectly aligned. Pearl called homes like this unlivable. Grandson Toby, Ebner's 14-year-old son, slipped into the room and sat silently in the corner with his phone in his hands. I waved at him, but he pretended not to notice. At his age, it probably wasn't cool to hang out with his grandfather. Dinner passed in a tense atmosphere. I tried to be polite, answering questions about my health and how I was coping alone in such a big house. Ebner and Ernestina often glanced back and forth as if they were having a silent conversation. I noticed Willow frown when Ebner mentioned my house for the 3rd time. After the main course, a superb roast duck with oranges, Ernestina brought out a cake. 43 candles created a near-fire hazard, but Ebner pulled it off, blowing them all out with one mighty exhale. The guests applauded. "Before we cut the cake," Ebner said, standing up with a glass of wine in his hand, "I have some news to tell you. Some of you already know, but for the rest of you, it will be a surprise." He looked at me and I felt an unpleasant chill. This is it, I thought. Now he's going to start talking about my house. My printing company, Lamston Print, has been offered a major contract with the Royal Comfort Hotel chain. That means we'll have to expand. New equipment, more staff, maybe even a new premises. The guests hummed approvingly. Ebner raised his hand, calling for silence. Of course, that requires investment. I've applied to the bank for a loan, and preliminary approval has been received. But, he looked at me again, the bank requires additional collateral, something more substantial than our house, which is already mortgaged. I felt everyone's eyes turn to me. Willow shook her head slightly, a barely perceptible movement, but I could tell she didn't approve of what her brother was about to say. "Father," Ebner turned to me fully, "Ernestina and I have been thinking about your house on Elm. It's big, old, needs constant upkeep. It's hard for you to handle it alone." "I can handle it," I said quietly but firmly. "Of course you do." Ebner smiled, the condescending smile I hated. "But we're all worried. What if you fall? What if there's a fire? You're far away from us. We won't be able to get here quickly." I wanted to say that they don't come anyway, even when I ask, but I kept silent, not in front of guests. "What's your point, Ebner?" I asked, even though I knew the answer perfectly well. "We found a great place in Sun Valley. It's a new senior complex on the outskirts of town. They have medical staff, a common dining room, even a swimming pool. And most importantly, you'll be among people your own age, not alone." "I don't want to live among people my own age," I replied. "I want to stay in my house." Ebner sighed as if he were explaining something to an uncomprehending child. "Father, be reasonable. If you sell the house, you'll have enough money to live comfortably in Sun Valley for the rest of your life. And there'll be enough left over for, other things." "Your business?" I finished for him. There was an awkward silence in the room. Willow coughed. "Ebner, can we not do this tonight? It's a holiday after all." My son ignored his sister. "It's a win-win for everyone, Father. You'll be safe, you'll be taken care of, and I can expand the business, secure a future for my children, your grandchildren. Isn't that what Mom would have wanted?" Mentioning Pearl made me angrier than any manipulation I'd ever experienced. "Don't you dare say what your mother would have wanted," I said, feeling my voice shake. "Pearl would never approve of me being evicted from the house I built for her." "No one is talking about eviction," Ernestina intervened in her soft but insistent voice. "It will be your voluntary decision, Word, for your own good." I looked at her, then at Ebner, and suddenly realized that they had already decided. They were just waiting for me to agree so they could act. They'd probably already done the paperwork and booked a place at Sun Valley. "I need to think about it," I said, rising from the table. "It's a big decision." "Of course, Father," Ebner smiled, but his eyes remained cold. "Think about it. But not for too long. The bank gave us 2 weeks to provide collateral, or the contract would go to a competitor." I nodded, not trusting my voice. Willow threw her brother a judgmental look but remained silent. Dexter looked down at his plate, clearly uncomfortable. The guests looked at each other, unsure how to react to the family scene. Ernestina, who was always good at smoothing over sharp edges, clapped her hands together. "And now the cake. Who wants a piece?" The conversation moved on to other topics, but the tension remained. I sat in silence, picking the cake with a fork which I could not taste. My mind was spinning with thoughts of home, of Pearl, of how quickly my children had forgotten everything we'd taught them: respect for their elders, family values, selflessness. When Ebner proclaimed a toast to his future success, I raised my glass with everyone else but didn't drink. I looked at my son and saw a stranger to whom I was only an obstacle to greater wealth. "What has happened to us, Pearl?" I thought, looking out the window at the darkening Castleton sky. "Where did we go wrong?" After an awkward conversation about my house, dinner continued in a strange, strained atmosphere. The guests tried to pretend nothing had happened, but their voices were a little louder than usual. Their laughter was nervous, and their glances slid in my direction every now and then. I became the unwitting center of attention, an old man trying to be evicted from his own home under the pretense of caring. A classic family drama that everyone there hoped to avoid in their own lives. Ernestina bustled around the table, pouring wine and offering a dessert refill. Her smile seemed glued on and her movements too abrupt. She'd always been a perfectionist, and any crack in the facade of perfect family life threw her off balance. Ebner, contrary to my expectations, didn't back down. After drinking more wine, he became even more insistent, as if the alcohol had given him the courage for a conversation he'd been planning for a long time. "You know," he said, addressing all the guests but looking at me, "my father has always been stubborn. Pearl, my mother, often said it was easier to move a mountain than to change his mind." Several of the guests chuckled politely. I kept a calm expression on my face, even though everything was boiling inside. Ebner never spoke of his mother by name in my presence. It was his way of distancing himself, of showing that Pearl didn't just belong to me. But now it was no longer stubbornness, but how do I put this softer? Ebner paused as if he were really searching for words, though I had no doubt his speech had been prepared in advance. An unwillingness to recognize reality. Age changes. "Ebner," Willow said quietly, but my brother ignored her. "2 weeks ago," he continued, looking at the guests, "I stopped by my father's house unannounced. You know what I found? The gas stove was on. No fire, just gas going. And my father was sitting quietly beside it, reading the newspaper, not noticing anything. It was a lie. 2 weeks ago, Ebner did come by, but there was no stove on. I wanted to object, but I knew it would look like an excuse and therefore an admission of guilt. Last month," Ebner raised his voice, sensing that he had my attention, "my dad forgot to pay the electric bill. I had to go over there and take care of it. And before that, there was the story of the forgotten keys. I did miss the electric bill, the only time I've missed it in years. But it wasn't because of forgetfulness, it was because I was in the hospital with pneumonia. Ebner didn't mention it. Son," I finally interrupted him, trying to speak calmly, "I appreciate your concern, but don't exaggerate." "Exaggerate?" Ebner threw up his hands. "Dad, you don't realize what's going on. That's normal at your age, but we, your family, can see that you're not the same." "What am I supposed to be like at 68? I asked, feeling the muscles in my face tense with restrained anger. Ebner smiled indulgently. "That's exactly what I'm talking about. You're 69, Dad. You've forgotten your age again." I did turn 69 in February, but I used to think of myself as 68 years old, which is what happens when the days blend into a monotonous sequence. But I realized that, to everyone here, it was another sign of my fading. "So," Ebner turned to the other guests, as if I were no longer able to participate in the conversation, "Ernestina and I found a great place. Sun Valley is not a nursing home, as some might think. It's an active living complex for seniors." I noticed a few of the guests looked at each other. Everyone knew that active living complex was just a euphemism for a nursing home designed to sound less intimidating. "It's got everything you need," Ernestina interjected enthusiastically. "Nurses around the clock, panic buttons in every room, a common dining room with a dietary menu. And the price is right," Willow added quietly. "It's not cheap," Ebner nodded, "but if we sell my father's house, we'll have enough money for years to come. And we're going to have to sell it someday, so why not now when it might do us some good?" "Benefit to whom?" I asked, looking straight into my son's eyes. There was an awkward pause. Dexter, Willow's husband, coughed and tried to change the subject. "That's a great cake, Ernestina. Did you bake it yourself?" But Ebner didn't let his wife answer. "Good for everyone, Father. For you, safety and care. For us, peace of mind for you. And yes, for my business too, I make no secret of that. But don't you want your children and grandchildren to prosper?" "I want my children and grandchildren to learn to respect my wishes," I answered quietly, but firmly. "This house is not just an asset. It's—" "We know," Ebner interrupted, rolling his eyes. "This is the house you built for Mom. We've heard that story 1,000 times, but Mom's been gone for 5 years and you're clinging to the past instead of thinking about the future." Mentioning Pearl in that context hurt more than any hint of my failure. I felt my fingertips go numb, a sure sign of rising blood pressure. I needed to calm down. I took a deep breath and exhaled slowly, just like Dr. Hansen had taught me to do. "Let's change the subject," Willow suggested, noticing my condition. Today was Ebner's birthday, not a family council. "Yeah, you're right." Ebner suddenly smiled, as if he'd just remembered the holiday. "I propose a toast to the future, to new beginnings and bold decisions." He raised his glass and everyone followed suit. I also took mine, half filled with red wine, which I almost never drank. Alcohol did not mix well with my medications. "To the future," the guests repeated in a discordant chorus and sipped from their glasses. I had just brought my glass to my lips when I noticed a strange movement out of the corner of my eye. Ebner, who sat at my right hand, quickly removed his hand from my glass. It was almost imperceptible. If it hadn't been for my years as a mailman, when I'd learned to notice the smallest details, I would have missed the gesture. I pretended to take a sip, but in fact the wine didn't even touch my lips. Examining the glass closely, I noticed nothing unusual, no powder on the surface, no change in color. But my intuition, which rarely failed me, signaled danger. Why would Ebner put something in my glass? Thoughts raced frantically through my mind. Poison me? No, too drastic even for Ebner. Probably some kind of laxative or diuretic to embarrass me in front of the guests, proving my helplessness once again. See, he can't even control his bowels bladder. He needs constant care. The perfect argument to convince everyone of the need for me to move to Sun Valley. Outrage fought in my soul with longing. Would my own son really be willing to do such a despicable thing? For what? For money? Or had his dislike for me grown over the years to the point where he was willing to humiliate his own father for petty gratification? Meanwhile, the conversation at the table returned to its usual course. They discussed the latest city news, children, politics, all the safe topics that usually come up at family dinners. I barely participated, pondering what to do next. I could just not drink the wine, but then Ebner's plan would still work. He'd say I'd become paranoid, afraid of my own family, making up conspiracies. Another sign of senile dementia. I could accuse him right here, in front of everyone, but who would believe an old man without proof? Ebner would just laugh and wag his finger at the guests, saying, "See what I was talking about?" And that's when I came up with an idea. Simple, but effective. An eye for an eye, as the Bible says. If Ebner wants someone to be embarrassed today, it shouldn't be his father. I waited until everyone was engrossed in a story one of Ebner's friends was telling. Something about a fishing trip and a giant trout that had fallen off the hook, a common tale that fishermen have been repeating since time immemorial. Everyone looked at the narrator, who was gesticulating vigorously in the center of the table, mimicking the size of the non-existent fish. Taking advantage of everyone's attention to the story, I discreetly switched my glass with that of Ernestina, who was sitting to my left. It wasn't difficult. The glasses were close, and I just had to make a quick movement before anyone looked in my direction. My conscience pricked me. Ernestina didn't deserve to be the victim instead of me. But then I remembered all her cold looks, all the times she'd supported Ebner in his efforts to get rid of me, all the times she'd kept the grandkids from visiting their grandfather, citing my tiredness. She was an accomplice, not an innocent victim. And then I say to him, "Frank, either you pull that fish out now or I'm going to push you into the lake," finished the narrator to general laughter. Ebner raised his glass. "To fishing stories that never change." Everyone drank again. I took a sip from Ernestina's glass, feeling the slight bitterness of wine on my tongue. I didn't notice any foreign flavor. Whatever Ebner had spiked it with was well dissolved and tasteless. Probably a laxative then. I wondered how fast it would take effect. Ernestina drained the glass almost to the bottom. She always drank faster than a lady should, as Pearl had said. I noticed that Ebner cast a quick glance at me, checking that I had drunk my wine. When he saw the nearly empty glass in my hand, he smiled slightly with the corner of his mouth, a smile I remembered from his childhood when he'd successfully put a frog in his sister's bed or hidden my glasses. The conversation continued. Willow talked about her new position at the insurance company, how she and Dexter were planning to go to Europe this summer. Ebner inserted comments about his business, hinting at a big contract that would soon change their lives for the better. The usual talk of ordinary people dreaming of more. I watched Ernestina trying to do so discreetly. About 15 minutes after she drank the wine, a strange expression appeared on her face. She turned pale and swallowed several times, as if trying to cope with nausea. "Ernestina, are you okay?" Willow asked, the first to notice the change. My sister-in-law smiled weakly. "Yeah, it's just something—" She didn't finish her sentence and huffed. She didn't finish the sentence and pressed her hand to her stomach. "Honey?" Ebner turned to his wife, sincere concern in his voice. Ernestina tried to answer, but instead of words, a low moan escaped her lips. She stood up abruptly from the table, knocking over her empty glass. "Excuse me, I have to—" and without speaking, quickly left the dining room. There was silence at the table. The guests looked at each other, not knowing how to react. Ebner frowned. "It must be a stomach thing. She's been cooking all day, hardly eating anything. Maybe she needs some help?" Willow suggested, half rising from her seat. "I'll check," Ebner said and followed his wife out. The guests looked around awkwardly. Some offered more wine. Others talked about the weather, the usual reaction of people who didn't know how to behave in an awkward situation. I sat in silence, trying to keep a neutral expression on my face. There were conflicting feelings inside me, satisfaction that Ebner's plan had failed, and shame that I had done that to Ernestina. What would Pearl say when she saw such petty vengeance on my part? Ebner returned a few minutes later, his face expressing a mixture of concern and irritation. "Ernestina is not well," he announced. "She apologizes, but she won't be able to return to the table." "What's the matter with her?" Dexter asked. "Should we call a doctor?" No, Ebner answered quickly. "It's just an upset stomach. It happens." He gave me a strange look, like he was trying to figure something out. I pretended to be concerned. "I hope it's nothing serious. Maybe it's something to do with the food." "Everyone ate the same thing," Ebner said, "and no one else got sick." "Maybe allergies?" suggested one of the guests. "My sister can't stand shellfish, and she gets the same twinge." "Ernestina isn't allergic," Ebner shook his head. "Probably just overworked with the holiday preparations." The conversation gradually returned to its previous course, but the atmosphere had changed. Without the hostess, the party seemed to have lost its center. The guests began to look at their watches and whisper. One of the neighbors was the first to apologize and began to say goodbye, referring to the need to get up early tomorrow. He was followed by the others. I, too, decided it was time to leave. After thanking Ebner for the invitation and wishing Ernestina a speedy recovery, through the door she never came out of the bathroom, I headed out. Willow volunteered to walk me to the car. "Are you okay, Dad?" she asked when we were alone in the driveway. "This talk about the house. Ebner shouldn't have brought it up today, not in front of everyone." "I'm fine," I answered, though it wasn't entirely true. "Don't worry about me." "I am worried," she put her hand on my shoulder. "You're still my daddy, and I want you to be happy. But Ebner's right in his own way, too. This house is too big for you alone." "Don't start, Willow," I pulled away gently. "Not tonight." She sighed. "Okay, but promise me you'll at least think about it. Not about the nursing home, but maybe a smaller apartment or moving in with me and Dexter. We have a guest room with a private bath." "I'll think about it," I promised, knowing I wasn't moving anywhere. My house was the last thing that connected me to Pearl, to our life, to a past that was becoming more and more blurred by the day. Willow hugged me goodbye, and I smelled her perfume, not at all like Pearl's, but somehow it reminded me of her. Maybe because there was the same tenderness in her daughter's gesture that I remembered in my wife's touch. I was just getting into the car when the front door of the house opened abruptly and Ebner appeared on the doorstep. Even in the darkness, I could see that his face was contorted with anger. "Dad!" He walked quickly to the car, ignoring Willow, who was still standing nearby. "What did you do? What are you talking about, son?" I tried to make my voice sound innocent and surprised. "Don't pretend!" Ebner was almost shouting. "Ernestina is very sick. What did you put her on?" Willow gasped. "Ebner, what are you talking about? Daddy didn't slip her anything." "Then why did she lock herself in the bathroom with—" He paused, apparently aware of his sister's presence, and continued in a quieter voice. "With an upset stomach. What is that but poisoning?" "Maybe food poisoning," I suggested. "Or a virus." "Don't you dare make a fool of me." Ebner leaned against the open car window, his face only a few centimeters from mine. "I saw you switch glasses. Do you think I'm blind?" I stayed calm, even though my heart was pounding like crazy. "I don't know what you're talking about, Ebner." "What glasses?" "You know which ones," he said through gritted teeth. "Yours and Ernestina's. Somehow you found out and decided to take revenge. But you won't get away with it, old man." "Ebner, that's enough," Willow intervened, pulling her brother away from the car. "You're drunk and you're talking nonsense. Dad didn't poison anyone. Why would he do that?" Ebner looked at me with such hatred that I could almost physically feel the heat of it. But there was something else in that look too. Confusion. Incomprehension. He knew I'd somehow figured out his plan, but he couldn't figure out how. "This isn't over," he said quietly without shouting, which made his words sound even more menacing. "You can't cling to the past forever, Father. Change is inevitable, whether you like it or not." He turned and headed back into the house with a quick stride, leaving Willow at a loss. "What was that all about?" she asked, walking back to my car. "Why is Ebner accusing you of poisoning Ernestina? That's absurd." I shrugged. "Your brother always had a flair for the dramatic. He must have had too much to drink." Willow shook her head. "No, there's something wrong. I've never seen him so angry." She glared at me. "Daddy, are you sure you don't know why he's so angry?" I could have told her the truth. I could have explained that Ebner had tried to humiliate me by putting something in my glass and how I'd turned the situation against him. Willow was always fair. She'd understand, I guess. But something held me back. Maybe a reluctance to drag my daughter into the conflict between me and my son. Maybe I was ashamed of my own petty behavior. Or maybe I was just tired of it all and wanted to get back to my quiet, empty house. "I don't know, honey," I said, starting the car. "Maybe it'll be clearer in the morning. Say hi to Dexter." Willow was clearly not satisfied with my answer, but she didn't insist. She gave me another hug through the car window and backed out, letting me pull out of the driveway. In the rearview mirror, I saw her standing with her arms crossed over her chest, watching the car drive away. Farther away, in the lighted doorway, Ebner's silhouette darkened as he watched us. I drove through the night streets of Castleton feeling a strange mixture of satisfaction and bitterness. What had happened tonight was only a symptom of a much deeper problem. My family had fallen apart and I didn't know if I could put it back together again. Turning on the radio, I heard an old song that Pearl and I had often listened to when we were young. The tune reminded me of a time when things were simpler, when the future seemed bright and promising, and my children looked at me with love instead of annoyance. "What happened to us, Pearl?" I thought again, gazing down the dark road. "Where did it all go wrong?" There was no answer, of course, only the quiet music from the speakers and the thought that tomorrow I would have to face the consequences of tonight. And they, I was sure, would not be long in coming. I woke up early, as usual. Old letter carrier habits don't disappear with retirement. My body still considered 5 in the morning the perfect time to start the day. For a while, I just lay there, looking up at the ceiling and listening to the silence of the house. Somewhere in the back of the building was the ticking of an old wall clock that Pearl had bought on sale during our first year of marriage. Outside, the birds were chirping softly. The spring was gaining strength in spite of all the hardships of human life. The events of last night came back to me in all their unpleasant details. Ebner's attempt to put something in my glass, my retaliatory maneuver, my son's angry accusations in the driveway, Willow's confused face. None of this boded well. I rose slowly, feeling my joints aching. Age was taking its toll, though I'd fought it diligently, doing the set of exercises Dr. Hansen recommended every morning, stretching, a few light squats, back exercises. Nothing complicated, but enough to keep my body in working order. Breakfast was modest, oatmeal with dried fruit and a cup of strong tea. Pearl had always insisted on a full breakfast of bacon and eggs, but since her death, I'd gradually switched to simpler food. I didn't see the point in cooking something complicated just for myself. I was just finishing the dishes when the phone rang. The hands on the clock read 7:30, too early for a normal call. I knew immediately who it was. "Hello," I said, wiping my hands with a kitchen towel. "Are you happy with yourself?" Ebner's voice sounded hoarse, like he'd been up all night. "Good morning, son," I said calmly. "To what do I owe this early call?" "Don't pretend you don't understand." I could hear the fury in his voice. "Ernestina spent the whole night in the bathtub. She's still turning inside out. I took her to the hospital at 3 in the morning. I felt a pang of guilt. I didn't expect it to be this serious. What was Ebner going to slip me if I reacted so strongly?" "I'm sorry to hear that," I said sincerely. "What do the doctors say?" "Acute stomach upset of unknown etiology," Ebner hissed. "But you and I know what it is, don't we? What did you put in her wine?" "I didn't put anything in her wine," I said firmly, "and I think you know that very well." There was a heavy pause on the line. I could almost hear Ebner gritting his teeth, trying to decide whether to persist or admit the truth. "You switched glasses," he finally said, quieter, without the aggression of before. "I saw it." "Suppose so." I didn't deny it. But what was in Ernestina's glass was meant for me, and we both know who put it there. There was silence again, longer this time. When Ebner spoke, his voice sounded tired and detached. It was a harmless laxative, just to embarrass you a little in front of the guests and make you realize you can't live alone. No harm to your health. Harmless? I couldn't believe my ears. Ernestina had to be taken to the hospital. "Maybe she's allergic," Ebner snapped. "Or maybe you'd gotten it wrong and slipped her something of your own. You haven't been yourself lately, Father." I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Ebner had always been like that. Even as a child, he'd never admitted his mistakes, always found a way to put the blame on others. "Anyway," I said, "I hope Ernestina feels better soon. Give her my apologies." "Apologize?" Ebner grinned bitterly. "Do you really think a simple sorry is going to be enough, after what you did?" "What did you expect after what you planned to do?" I asked quietly. "This is different." He sounded absolutely convinced that he was right. "I did it for your own good. You're a stubborn old man who can't see the obvious. You need help. You can't live alone. And the best way to convince me of that is to put laxatives in my glass?" I shook my head, even though Ebner couldn't see it. "Son, I'm disappointed." "Don't you dare call me that," he suddenly exploded. "Don't you dare pretend to be a caring father. Where was your concern when I really needed it? When Ernestina and I were trying to buy a house and the bank refused us a loan because of my credit history? When my printing company was on the verge of bankruptcy the first year? When Toby needed surgery and our insurance didn't cover all the costs?" I was silent, stunned by this sudden flood of accusations. Some of it was fair. I wasn't always there when I was needed. Being a mailman was time-consuming, and I often missed important moments in the children's lives. But the other part was a clear exaggeration. I helped Ebner with a down payment on a house, acted as a guarantor on his mortgage despite his bad credit history. I'd given money for Toby's medical treatment, even though Ebner later insisted it was a loan and returned the entire amount, refusing to accept the help. "I've always tried to help you, son," I finally said, "but you always wanted more." "That's enough," Ebner cut me off. "I didn't call to get into a fight. I just wanted you to know this isn't over. What you did to Ernestina, I won't forget it." And he hung up without waiting for me to answer. I slowly put the phone back on the lever, feeling my hands shaking. Anger, resentment, disappointment all mixed up in my soul. But strongest of all was the bitterness of realizing how deep the gulf between me and my son was. Once I held him in my arms, taught him to ride a bike, helped him with his homework. Now he looked at me as an obstacle, as a problem to be solved. To distract myself from the heavy thoughts, I decided to check my email. This had always been a challenge for me. Computers came into my life too late, when the habit of paper letters and face-to-face communication was already deeply ingrained. But Pearl insisted that I learn to use email. "Otherwise, you'll fall behind in life, Ward," she used to say. The old computer stood in the small room that Pearl and I called the study. It had once been a nursery, and then, as the children grew up and moved away, we had converted it into a place to store important documents, photo albums, and other family heirlooms. The computer booted up slowly with a distinctive hum that reminded me of the old mail machines in the office. When the desktop finally appeared, I launched the browser and entered my email address. The login and password were stored in a small notepad next to the monitor. I couldn't remember them no matter how hard I tried. The mailbox was full. The last time I'd checked it was months ago, and since then I'd accumulated a lot of mail, mostly advertisements and newsletters I'd once subscribed to and didn't know how to unsubscribe. But among them were some important messages. From the bank, from the insurance company, from the municipality. I began to go through them methodically, deleting the unnecessary ones and keeping the important ones. Suddenly my eye caught a familiar name, First National Bank of Castleton, the same bank where I had an account and where, I recalled, I had guaranteed Ebner and Ernestina's mortgage 3 years ago. It was shortly after Pearl's death. Ebner and his family were living in a small apartment on the outskirts of town at the time, and an opportunity came up to buy a house in a new neighborhood. Because of a failed business project when he was younger, Ebner had a bad credit history, and the bank refused to give him a mortgage without a guarantor. I agreed to help. It seemed like the right thing to do, a way to support my son during a difficult time. Pearl would approve. I opened the letter from the bank. It was dated last month and contained a quarterly report on the status of the mortgage loan on which I was guarantor. Everything looked fine. Ebner and Ernestina were making regular payments. There were no late payments or other problems. But there was a strange line at the end of the report, mention of an additional loan tied to the same collateralized property. The loan was arranged a month ago. The amount was significant, clearly more than needed for household needs, and most surprisingly, I was also the guarantor on the loan. I frowned, trying to remember if I had signed any documents lately. There hadn't been any. Ebner had mentioned the business expansion and the need for collateral at dinner last night, but there had been no mention of the loan being finalized. And I certainly hadn't agreed to be a guarantor. Alarmed, I started looking for other letters from the bank. There were several of them, and they formed an interesting picture. Turns out the bank had been sending me notices about every payment on Ebner's mortgage. Most of them I just hadn't seen since I rarely checked my mail. But they all indicated that my son had been paying faithfully, at least for the last 6 months, which covered the letters I found. And then, about a month ago, there were messages about a new loan. One of them contained scanned copies of documents, and I opened them, feeling anxiety growing. What I saw made me freeze in front of the monitor. The documents bore my signature, or rather, something that was supposed to represent it. But I had never signed those papers. What's more, the handwriting didn't even look like mine. It was a crude forgery that anyone who knew my real signature would have easily recognized. Ebner had forged my signature. My own son committed forgery to get a loan to grow his business. He had used me without asking permission, without saying a word, simply appropriating my name and my responsibility. I felt nausea come up to my throat. This was betrayal in its purest form. It was one thing to want me to sell the house and move into a nursing home, but it was quite another to forge my signature on financial documents. It was no longer just disrespectful, it was a crime. Thoughts raced feverishly through my head. What to do? Call the bank? Call the police? Confront Ebner directly? Each option had its own consequences, and none seemed entirely correct. If I contacted the bank or the police, Ebner could face criminal prosecution. Despite everything that had happened, he was still my son, and the thought of him going to jail because of my statement was unbearable. Pearl would never approve. On the other hand, if I just ignored what had happened, it would mean acquiescing to Ebner's actions. And what if he can't make the loan payments? Then I'd be liable as guarantor. I could lose my house, my savings, everything I had left. I decided to print out the documents so I could have physical proof of the forgery. The old printer took a long time to warm up, making whirring and clicking noises before producing the first page. When all the documents were printed, I folded them into an envelope and put them away in the desk drawer where I kept important papers. Then I dialed the bank's number. The phone was answered by a friendly girl who, after listening to my question, connected me to the mortgage lending department. "What can I do for you?" the male voice on the other end of the line asked. "My name is Ward Lamston," I began. "I would like information about a loan where I am a guarantor." The loan was taken out by my son, Ebner Lamston. "One moment, Mr. Lamston." I could hear the computer keys clacking. "Yes, I can see that. Your son has 2 loans with you as guarantor, a mortgage on a house at 15 Maple Street and a business loan from last month. Which one are you interested in?" "I'd like to know the details of the second loan," I said. "The business loan. When exactly was it made? What documents did I sign?" "The loan was approved and disbursed on March 23rd, the clerk replied. "As for the documents, we have a standard guarantee agreement with your signature, as well as an agreement to check your credit history. Everything is in order." "See, that's the thing. I didn't sign any documents," I said, feeling my heart start to beat faster. "I didn't agree to be a guarantor on this loan." There was a pause on the line. "Mr. Lamston, are you saying that your signature on the documents is forged?" There was a note of concern in the clerk's voice. "That's exactly what I'm saying," I confirmed. "In that case," he said slowly, "you must come to the bank in person with identification and make an official statement. This is a serious accusation that will require investigation. The police may be involved." "I understand," I said. "When can I come?" "The bank is open until 6 in the evening, but for such matters it's better to come in the morning when the management of the department is in place." "Say tomorrow at 10 o'clock?" I agreed and hung up, feeling strangely empty. The decision had been made, there was no turning back. Tomorrow I would go to the bank and formally report the forgery of my signature. That would set in motion a process that could have the most serious consequences for Ebner. But something inside me changed after the call to the bank. Bitterness and resentment gave way to cold determination. Ebner had crossed a line. He hadn't just tried to manipulate me or humiliate me. He'd committed a crime that could cost me everything I had. And he'd done it without hesitation, without regret, simply arrogating to himself the right to decide for me. I remembered his words on the phone this morning. This isn't over. He was threatening me, his father, because his plan to humiliate me had failed. What would his actions be next? Another loan on my behalf? An attempt to declare me incompetent to gain control of my finances? Forced placement in a nursing home? No, I couldn't let this continue. It was time to put a stop to it, even if it meant conflict with my own son. Some lessons are only learned through pain, and it looked like Ebner was about to learn one of them. I went back into the study and sat down at the computer again. This time I opened the word processor and started typing slowly, with 2 fingers, just like Pearl had taught me. I wrote down everything that had happened in the last few days, all the facts, all the details that might matter. It was a diary of sorts, a testimony that might be needed if the situation escalated. When I had finished, I printed out the notes and put them in the same envelope where the documents from the bank were. Then I pulled my checkbook and bank statements for the past year out of my desk drawer. I needed to assess my financial situation, to see what I was risking and what resources I had available to resist. The numbers were disappointing. The letter carrier's pension didn't make me rich. Most of my savings had gone to Pearl's medical care in the last months of her life. I was left with a house, fully paid off, debt-free, but in need of constant maintenance and repairs, and a small amount in my bank account enough to live modestly as a retiree, but clearly not enough to cover a large loan if Ebner stopped making payments. I closed my eyes, feeling fatigue pile up on my shoulders. It was all too difficult, too painful. At my age, I would have liked to spend my days in the garden playing with my grandchildren, remembering the life I'd lived with warmth and gratitude. Instead, I found myself caught up in financial fraud and family betrayals. "What would you do in my shoes, Pearl?" I mentally asked, looking at the picture of my wife on the table. She was smiling in the picture, holding a bouquet of wildflowers I had picked for her on our 30th anniversary. Her eyes seemed to look straight into my soul, seeing all the doubts and fears. I knew the answer. Pearl had always been fair, but merciful. She wouldn't let Ebner continue down the path of deceit and manipulation, not out of revenge, but because it would destroy himself. Sometimes love meant firmness, not indulgence. The decision is finally taking shape in my mind. Tomorrow I'll go to the bank and report the forgery of the signature. I'll withdraw my guarantee on both my mortgage and my business loan. Let Ebner face the consequences of his actions. Maybe this will be a lesson to him that will make him rethink his attitude toward life, money, and family. It's gonna hurt, for me and for him. But sometimes pain is necessary for healing. As Pearl said, quoting her mother, "A boil needs to be opened so it can heal." I put all the papers away, shut down the computer, and walked out of the study. The house seemed too big and empty, filled with ghosts of the past. But it was my home, my fortress, my last refuge, and I wasn't going to give it up without a fight. The sense of humiliation and betrayal I'd felt when I'd learned about the signature forgery had gradually transformed into cold determination. Ebner had to realize that every action had consequences, and if he thought I was a weak old man who could be manipulated and deceived, he was in for a nasty surprise. The morning was clear and cool, perfect weather for important decisions. I got up early, as usual, but instead of my usual routine, I carefully prepared for my trip to the bank. I picked out my best suit, the dark blue one I'd worn at Pearl's funeral. It still hung a little loose, but today it was just as well. I wanted to look serious and presentable. I shaved extra carefully, even spritzed on some cologne, the Old Spice that Pearl used to give me every Christmas. The smell triggered a flood of memories, our holidays, when the kids were small, when the family was still a unit. It all seemed so far away now, as if from another life. I put the documents in an old leather briefcase, checked to make sure I had my ID and bank cards. Everything was ready. One last look in the mirror showed a tired older man with a determined expression. "You got this, Waird," I said to my reflection, and walked out of the house. The First National Castleton Bank was located in the center of town, in an old stone building with columns. I often passed by it while delivering mail, but I rarely went inside. I preferred to withdraw money from the ATM, and paid most bills at the post office, the old-fashioned way. Inside, things had changed since the last time I'd been here. Fewer tellers, more computers. Young men in suits sat behind glass partitions talking to customers. Brightly colored posters advertised loans, deposits, investment opportunities. Everything looked modern and a little foreign to a person of my generation. Waiting for me in the office was a middle-aged man in an austere suit. He introduced himself as Morton Higgs, head of the mortgage lending department. Sitting next to him was a woman he introduced as Alice Farrow from the legal department. "Mr. Lamston," Higgs began after we had exchanged handshakes and I had sat down across from them, "yesterday you informed our employee that your signature on loan documents may have been forged. This is a very serious allegation and we would like to discuss it in detail." I nodded and took the printed documents out of my briefcase. "I never signed these papers," I said, pointing to the signature on the guarantee agreement. "That's not my handwriting. I didn't even know this loan existed until yesterday, when I checked my email and saw the notices from the bank." Farrow took the documents and scrutinized the signature. "Do you have any documents with your real signature with you for comparison?" she asked. I pulled out my passport and driver's license, as well as some checks I had signed recently. Farrow spent a long time comparing the signatures, occasionally glancing at me over her glasses. "Indeed, the signatures are noticeably different," she said at last. "Mr. Lamston, are you prepared to make an official statement about the forgery, and perhaps to give a statement to the police?" "Yes," I answered firmly. "I'm sure of what I'm saying." "Can you suggest who might have forged your signature?" Higgs asked, though I could see in his eyes that he already knew the answer. "My son, Ebner Lamston," I said, feeling the bitterness rise to my throat. "He's the only one who had motive and opportunity. The loan is on his business, from his application." Higgs nodded as if that confirmed his hunch. "Mr. Lamston, let me explain what happens next. We will suspend the loan and begin an internal investigation. If the forgery is confirmed, we will be forced to contact law enforcement. Forging a signature on financial documents is a felony." I took a deep breath. Despite the determination with which I'd come here, the thought of Ebner facing criminal prosecution was heavy. "I understand," I said, "but there's something else." Higgs raised his eyebrows. "Yeah? I also want to withdraw my guarantee on the mortgage loan," I continued, "the one that was taken out 3 years ago when my son bought the house." "That's more complicated," Higgs frowned. "Unlike the business loan, your signature is real, I assume?" "Yes," I confirmed. "But then I agreed to be a guarantor under certain conditions. My son had promised that he would not take out additional loans against the house without my consent. He violated that condition by forging my signature. This is a material breach of our agreement." "I understand," I said. "But isn't the fact that my signature was forged on another loan sufficient reason to renegotiate all agreements with this client?" Higgs and Farrow looked at each other again. There was a look of surprise in their eyes, as they had not expected such legal knowledge from an elderly pensioner. "You're right," Higgs said slowly. "The bank can renegotiate all credit agreements with a client if there is evidence of fraud on his part. But that would have serious consequences for your son, Mr. Lamston. If we revoke the mortgage guarantee, he will have to either repay the loan in full immediately or provide other collateral. Otherwise, the bank will be forced to initiate foreclosure proceedings." I remained silent, contemplating the situation. I didn't want my grandchildren to end up on the street because of their father's mistakes. But at the same time, I knew I had to teach Ebner a lesson, to stop him before he went too far. "I have a suggestion," I said finally. "We freeze the business loan and start investigating the forgery. As for the mortgage, I'm willing to continue as guarantor, but on the condition that all payments go through me. That is, Ebner will wire the money to me, and I'll pay the mortgage. That way, I know that the payments are on time and in full." We spent the next hour going over the details. I signed the forged signature statement, agreed to participate in the investigation, and signed the new mortgage loan documents. Higgs explained that the bank would contact Ebner later today to notify him of the situation and the need to appear at the bank to resolve the matter. By the time I left the bank, it was almost noon. The bright spring sun was blinding my eyes, so I put on the old hat I always carried with me in the car. Before I got behind the wheel, I decided to walk around downtown to gather my thoughts. The phone in my jacket pocket vibrated, interrupting my musings. I pulled it out and saw my son's name on the screen. The bank had apparently already contacted him. I took a deep breath and answered, "Hello? What did you do?" Ebner's voice shook with rage. "Do you realize what you've done?" "Hello, son," I said calmly. "I believe the bank has already contacted you." "Contacted? They froze all my company's accounts. They've blocked credit. They want me to appear for an explanation. What kind of signature forgery are they talking about?" I kept quiet, giving him a chance to talk. Sometimes silence is more effective than words. "Dad, are you there?" Ebner's voice became even more tense. "Answer me." "I'm here," I said, "and I understand perfectly well. You forged my signature to get the loan. I discovered it and reported it to the bank. It's all very clear." "Look," he finally said, more calmly, "I admit I was wrong about the signature. It was stupid. But can't you see that this contract is the chance of a lifetime? If I miss it, I'll never get another opportunity like this again. I can multiply the turnover of the print shop, hire new people, go to another level." "And for this you were willing to frame your own father?" I asked. "What if you couldn't pay the loan? The bank would have come after me, and I could have lost everything. My house, my savings, everything I had left." "I wouldn't have let that happen," Ebner said confidently. "Everything had been calculated. The contract guaranteed a steady stream of payments that would more than cover all the loans." "You've always been sure of your plans," I said, "ever since high school. Remember when you wanted to open a comic book store, then the internet cafe, then the travel agency? All those projects ended the same way. You lost interest and money, and your mom and I had to help you out. Let's meet and talk like adults. I'm on my way to your place now. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Ebner arrived exactly 20 minutes after the call. His face was red with anger, his hair disheveled, his tie askew. He looked like he'd run out of the office in a panic, not taking care of his usually impeccable appearance. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. "I made tea." "Tea?" He grinned bitterly as I walked in with a tray. "Really? You ruined my life and now you're offering tea?" "I didn't ruin your life, Ebner," I said, setting the tray on the coffee table. "You put it in jeopardy when you decided to forge my signature." "It was a technicality." He raised his voice again. "Just a signature on a piece of paper, and you turned it into a disaster." "No, son," I shook my head. "It's not just a signature. It's a crime, and it's not your first step in that direction." "What are you talking about?" Ebner frowned. "About the laxative you put in my glass," I reminded him. "About how you manipulated me for years to get what you wanted. About how you turned Ernestina against me and even tried to influence Willow." "Bullshit!" Ebner cut him off. "You've become paranoid, Father. You see conspiracies where there aren't any." "I do?" I raised an eyebrow. "Then explain to me why you didn't ask my permission to bail me out? Why you acted in secret?" Ebner looked away. "I told you I wanted to save time. The contract had to be signed quickly or someone else would have gotten it. And so you decided to risk your freedom and my well-being." I shook my head. "No, Ebner. It wasn't a matter of rushing. You just knew I'd say no." "Of course you would," he suddenly exploded. "You always say no, always standing in the way of my success. When I wanted to go to business school, you insisted on community college. When I wanted to move to the big city, you and Mom talked me into staying in Castleton. All my life you clipped my wings, and now you wonder why I didn't come to you with my hand out once again." I was stunned by this flood of accusations. There was some truth to what Ebner had said. Pearl and I had indeed advised him not to rush into business school until he had decided on a direction, and we had expressed concern about his plans to move to a metropolitan area with no concrete prospects. But we did it out of love, out of a desire to keep him from making mistakes, not out of a desire to clip his wings. "Mom and I always wanted the best for you," I said quietly. "We supported all your endeavors when we saw that you were serious. Remember who gave you the money for your first printing equipment? Who helped with the down payment on the house? And you've been reminding me about it ever since," Ebner muttered. "Every time something goes wrong, you remember how much you've done for me." "What happens now?" he finally asked. "With the loan, with the business, with the house?" "That's up to you," I replied. "I offered the bank a compromise. They're willing to keep the mortgage on the condition that all payments go through me. That is, you will transfer the money to me, and I will pay the mortgage." "Like a child who can't be trusted with money," Ebner grinned bitterly. "Like a man who's abused his trust," I corrected him. "As for the business loan, the bank has launched an investigation. If they find evidence of forgery, and they will, the case may be turned over to the police." Ebner turned pale. "Is that what you want? To have your son tried for fraud?" "Of course not," I shook my head. "But I want you to understand the gravity of the situation. You crossed the line, Ebner, and now you have to face the consequences." "Do you have any other financing options?" I asked. "Other investors? Partners?" Ebner shook his head. "I tried, but no one wants to invest in small businesses in Castleton. Too small a market, too much risk." "What about selling a stake in the business?" I suggested. "Do you have any employees who could become partners?" "Maybe," Ebner said uncertainly. "Harvey, my deputy, has been wanting to get in on the action for a long time, but his contribution alone won't be enough." "Start there," I advised. "Talk to Harvey, look for other potential investors, and be honest with the bank. Admit your mistake. Offer a repayment plan." "What about my house?" Ebner asked. "If the bank pulls the mortgage, I've already told you, I'm willing to continue as guarantor under new conditions. You won't have to worry about the mortgage if you're honest with me." Ebner was silent for a long time, pondering my words. Then suddenly he asked, "Why are you doing this? After everything I've said and done, why are you still trying to help?" I smiled sadly. "Because you are my son, and because your mother would never forgive me if I let you fall when I could have reached out my hand." At the mention of Pearl, Ebner's eyes moistened. He turned away quickly, trying to hide his emotions. "I don't understand you, Father," he said quietly. "You could have just ignored the fake and everything would have been fine. Instead, you caused trouble for all of us, and now you're offering to help." "I caused trouble?" I shook my head. "No, Ebner. You created the problems when you decided you could cheat on your own father. I just didn't let you escape the consequences. Sometimes that's what help is all about, letting a person realize their mistakes and correct them. News travels fast in a small town, especially when it comes to a scandal like identity fraud." Toward the evening of the same day I was meeting with Ebner, I got a call from Willow. Her voice sounded worried, almost frightened. "Dad, is it true? What Dexter told me? That Ebner forged your signature on some bank documents?" I sighed. Some of the bank clerks must have known Dexter. Castleton was too small a town to keep anything a secret. "Yes, dear, it's true," I answered, determined not to hide the reality of the situation from my daughter. "Your brother took out a business loan using my signature without my knowledge." There was silence on the line. I could almost see Willow rubbing her forehead, a gesture she'd adopted from Pearl when she was upset or puzzled. "I can't believe it," she finally said. "I mean, it's a crime, Dad. What's going to happen now?" "I've already talked to Ebner," I said. "We're trying to find a way out. The bank has opened an investigation, but I'm hoping we can resolve this without involving the police." "Oh my God," Willow whispered. "What about Ernestina? The kids? Do they know?" "I'm not sure," I answered honestly. "Ebner came alone. Maybe he hadn't told them yet." "I'll be there," Willow said firmly. "Tomorrow. Dexter will stay with the kids and I'll come to you. We need to discuss this as a family." I wanted to object, to say that she shouldn't get involved in the conflict between me and her brother, but part of me was glad that Willow was taking my side. My daughter and I hadn't been as close as we had been in recent years, and her support now meant more to me than I could put into words. "Okay," I said. "I'll be waiting for you." The next morning, as I was eating breakfast, the doorbell rang. When I opened it, I saw Ebner. He looked exhausted with dark circles under his eyes as if he'd been up all night. Behind him stood Ernestina, pale and tense. "May I come in?" Ebner asked without his usual assertiveness. I stepped back silently, letting them into the house. We walked into the kitchen where my uneaten oatmeal was still on the table. "Sorry for the early visit," Ebner said, sitting down at the table. Ernestina sat next to him, hands folded in her lap like a model schoolgirl. "Ernestina and I discussed the situation all night and decided to come to you before I went to the bank." I sat down across from them, waiting for them to continue. "I was wrong," Ebner said, looking me straight in the eye. "What I did to the signature, it was unforgivable. And what happened at my birthday party, with the laxative," he shook his head. "I don't know what came over me. I guess I was just, confused." Ernestina put her hand on his shoulder. "We're both confused, Weird," she said, addressing me personally for the first time in years. "Ebner told me everything, about the signature, about the laxative, about your conversation yesterday." I was in shock. I couldn't believe that we'd gotten to this point. I looked at them, not knowing what to say. Part of me wanted to just forget about everything, go back to the way things were. But the other part of me remembered all the years of estrangement, all the small and big betrayals, all the times when Ebner and Ernestina had put their own interests ahead of family ties. "What made you change your mind?" I asked at last. "Yesterday you were ready to accuse me of every mortal sin, Ebner, and today you came to apologize. What happened?" Ebner and Ernestina looked at each other. "The truth," said Ebner. "The truth happened. When I got home yesterday, Ernestina knew right away that something was wrong. I told her about our conversation, about the bank freezing the accounts, about the investigation." He paused, and she asked me bluntly, "Did you really forge your father's signature?" And I couldn't lie. Not to her, not after everything that had happened. Ernestina squeezed his hand. "I was furious," she admitted. "I had never seen Ebner so small. He confessed to everything, not just the signature forgery, but what had happened at the birthday party, how he planned to slip you laxatives to make you feel helpless and agree to sell the house, how he manipulated you for years to get financial support." "And you forced him to come here?" I asked. "No," Ebner shook his head. "It was my decision. After Ernestina expressed everything she thought, we talked for a long time. About us, about our family, about the example we set for our children. And I realized I'd become what I'd always despised, a man willing to betray his loved ones for money." I was silent, trying to comprehend what I had heard. Their sincerity seemed genuine, but I'd known Ebner too long to trust the sudden change without reservation. "What do you want me to do?" I asked bluntly. "Nothing," Ebner answered. "I mean, of course I'd like you to withdraw your statement about the signature forgery, but I realize I have no right to ask you to do so. I'm here to plead guilty and say I'm willing to take responsibility. I'm going to go to the bank and confess." "What about the printing press? The contract?" "I talked to Harvey as you advised," said Ebner. "He's agreed to put up the money and become a partner. It's not as much money as we need, but it's a start. Maybe we can find other investors. And if not, well, we'll have to cancel the contract. It'll be hard, but it's not the end of the world." I looked at my son, trying to see him as the little boy I once taught to ride a bike. That teenager who came to me for advice when he fell in love for the first time. That young man who stood beside me at Pearl's funeral, squeezing my hand tightly when I was ready to break. "I'll talk to the bank," I said finally. "Maybe we can find a solution that won't hurt your reputation or your business, but on one condition." "What's that?" Ebner stepped forward. "No more secrets. No more manipulation. No more trying to control my life or make decisions for me. I'm your father, not an obstacle to your success." Ebner nodded. "I promise. And I'll do anything to earn back your trust, even if it takes years." At that moment, the doorbell rang. I apologized and went to open it. Willow stood on the doorstep with a determined look on her face. "Daddy," she hugged me, "how are you?" Then, looking behind me, she saw Ebner and Ernestina in the kitchen. "Oh, you're already here." "Willow?" Ebner looked surprised. "What are you doing here?" "Same thing you are, I guess," she replied, walking into the house, trying to make sense of this mess. We all sat at the kitchen table for the next hour discussing the situation. Willow was tougher than I'd expected. She wasn't shy about expressing her disappointment with her brother's actions, and she made it clear that she supported me. "You should have thought about the consequences," she said, looking at Ebner. "What if Dad hadn't discovered the forgery? What if you hadn't been able to pay the loan? The bank would have foreclosed on his house, the only thing he had left of his mom." "I know," Ebner replied quietly. "I didn't think about the consequences. Or rather, I only thought about the benefits, not the risks." "And it wouldn't be the first time," Willow added. "You've always been like this, always thinking that the world should fit you, not the other way around. Remember when you borrowed my car without asking and wrecked it? Or how you convinced your mom you needed money for your school books and bought concert tickets yourself?" Ebner lowered his eyes. "I remember, and I'm ashamed of it." "Shame is a good thing," Willow said. "Shame means you realize what you've done. But understanding isn't enough. It takes action to make things right." Ernestina, who had been silent for most of the conversation, suddenly spoke. "We have a plan," she said. "Ebner and I discussed it yesterday. First, he'll confess to the bank that he forged the signature and offer to repay the loan in installments. Second, we'll sell the second car to raise the down payment. Third, like Ebner said, he'll offer a stake in Harvey's business and maybe other investors." "And what about Wired's house?" Willow asked. "Do you still want him to sell it?" Ernestina shook her head. "No. We were wrong to try to pressure him. This house is his, and only he decides what to do with it." I listened to them, feeling strangely relieved. For the first time in a long time, we were having a truly honest conversation, without ulterior motives or innuendo. Even if Ebner and Ernestina weren't completely sincere, the very fact that we were discussing problems openly was already progress. "I think we all need to make some changes," I said as the discussion began to die down. "I'm not without blame for our deteriorating relationship either. After Pearl died, I shut myself away, withdrew from you. Maybe if I'd been more open, more available, things would have turned out differently." "Dad, don't blame yourself," Willow countered. "You had a right to grieve the way you needed to." "Yes," I agreed, "but 5 years is too long to live in the past. Pearl would want me to move on, to be a part of your lives, a part of your grandchildren's lives." I paused, gathering my thoughts. "I have a proposal, a compromise, if you will." All three of them looked at me with interest. "I won't sell the house," I said. "But I could convert the annex into a separate dwelling for myself. A small apartment with a separate entrance is all I need. And the main house," I looked at Ebner and Ernestina, "could be a place for family gatherings, where the grandchildren could stay on weekends, where we could all gather for holidays, a family center of sorts." That's a wonderful idea," Willow said slowly, as if thinking it over. "You'd keep the house, but it would serve the whole family. And we could help fix up the outhouse, Ebner added. I'm good at construction, and Harvey's a former electrician, so he could do the new wiring. I could do the design, Ernestina suggested, and I was surprised to hear the genuine enthusiasm in her voice. Make it comfortable and cozy for you. We continued to discuss details, and gradually the idea became more and more concrete. The annex that used to be a workshop could indeed be converted into a small but comfortable apartment. It would require heating, plumbing, and the addition of a bathroom, but it was all doable. By noon, we had a rough plan of action. Ebner was to go to the bank and come clean. I promised to talk to the bank manager and ask for leniency, given that my son had pleaded guilty. Willow volunteered to help with the legal side of things. Her husband Dexter knew a good lawyer who could advise us. And Ernestina promised to start planning the renovation of the outhouse. As Ebner and Ernestina were leaving, my son stopped in the doorway and turned to me. "Thank you, Father," he said, "for giving me a chance to make things right. I won't let you down again." I nodded, not trusting my voice. Something in the look on Ebner's face, in his tone, reminded me of when we'd been really close. Maybe not all was lost yet. Willow stayed with me. We sat in the living room drinking tea and reminiscing about the past, the good times when Pearl was alive, when the kids were small, when the future seemed bright and cloudless. "Do you think he's really changed?" Willow asked, referring to Ebner. "Or is this just temporary remorse until he gets out of trouble?" I wondered. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "People can change, but it usually happens slowly with difficulty. Ebner had always been impulsive, always looking for the easy way out, but he's also always been capable of genuine love and affection. I guess time will tell." "Do you?" Willow looked at me carefully. "Are you really ready to forgive him after everything he's done?" "I'm working on it," I said. "Forgiveness is a process, not an overnight decision. I want to forgive him. I want to trust that he can change. But trust has to be earned. We'll see how he behaves in the coming months." Willow smiled. "You know, you're an amazing man, Dad. After everything that's happened, you're still able to give people a chance. Mom would be proud of you." The thought that Pearl would be proud of me warmed my heart. I had so often questioned my decisions after her death, so often wondered what she would have done in my place. Maybe I was finally beginning to find my own path. The following weeks were filled with activity. Ebner, as promised, honestly confessed to the bank about the signature forgery. Thanks to my plea and the fact that he had come forward with the confession himself, the bank decided not to take the case to the police, limiting itself to a fine and temporary closure of the line of credit. The business loan was canceled, but Ebner managed to find other investors, including Harvey, and although the amount was less than he had originally planned, it was enough to fulfill the minimum requirements of the contract. Renovation of the annex began almost immediately. Ebner came every weekend with tools and materials, sometimes with Harvey, sometimes with other friends. Willow and Dexter also helped when they could. Even the grandchildren participated. Toby turned out to be a good helper with the hammer, and Lydia was enthusiastic about choosing colors for the walls and curtains. Ernestina was completely transformed in her attitude toward me. She called almost every day, consulting on the layout, bringing fabric samples and furniture catalogs. One day she confided to me that she had always felt uncomfortable in my presence, thinking I was judging her as not being a good enough wife for my son. "I was wrong," she said. "Instead of trying to get to know you better, I distanced myself, and then it was too late, or so it seemed to me." "It's never too late for new beginnings," I replied, quoting Pearl, who always believed in the possibility of change. By early summer, the addition was ready. 60 square meters of personal space, a bedroom, a small living room, a kitchenette, and a bathroom. Everything was new, modern, but with a touch of antiquity that I had always appreciated. Ernestina had done a great job of selecting furniture and accessories that perfectly matched my taste, although I had never told her that directly. Moving day became a real family celebration. Ebner barbecued in the backyard. Willow baked Mom's apple pie from an old recipe, and the grandchildren ran around the garden playing hide and seek. Looking at them, I felt something long forgotten come back, a sense of belonging, a sense of family. In the evening, when everyone had dispersed, I sat in my new living room, looking out the window at the main house. The lamps in the windows created a warm, cozy glow. I thought about Pearl, about how much she loved this house, how she had put her soul into it. She would approve of my decision, I was sure. The house continued to serve the family, though not in the way we had originally planned. I pulled an old silver watch out of my pocket, a gift from Pearl for our 20th anniversary. It had long since gone, but I carried it around with me as a talisman, a reminder of a time that couldn't be brought back but could be treasured. Maybe it was time to put them in for repair, to get them going again. Maybe it's time to move forward, not forgetting the past, but not living it either. By defending my dignity, by resisting Ebner's manipulations, I'd not only regained my self-respect, but, oddly enough, I'd earned the respect of my family. Not ostentatious deference out of fear or self-interest, but real respect based on understanding and acceptance. A new chapter of my life was just beginning. And though I knew there were still many challenges ahead, that my relationship with Ebner was still fragile and needed work, I looked forward to the future with hope. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a lonely old man clinging to the past, but part of something bigger, a family that had found its way back to each other despite all the challenges. In the small annex that was now my home, I could live independently, keeping my habits and rituals intact. And in the big house, the grandchildren could stay overnight, visit on weekends, filling the old walls with new laughter and new memories. It was a compromise that worked for all of us, preserving the past while creating space for the future. I put the kettle on and pulled out a box of photos I'd moved from the main house, old snapshots, yellowed by time, capturing moments that would otherwise be lost. Pearl, young and smiling with little Willow in her arms. Ebner on his first bike, proud and a little scared. A family picnic by the lake, where we all laugh at some long-forgotten joke. These memories were a treasure that no one could take away from me. But now I realized they were meant to be a foundation, not a prison. A foundation for new relationships, new traditions, a new life. The kettle whistled, bringing me back to the present. I made tea, not in a single cup as I usually did, but in the small teapot Ernestina had given me as a housewarming gift. "In case you have guests," she said with a smile. And I realized that now there really could be guests. Children, grandchildren, maybe even new friends. Life went on, opening up new possibilities, new horizons. I sat down in the chair by the window, the same one in which Pearl liked to knit in the evenings, and raised my cup in a quiet toast. "Here's to new beginnings, Pearl," I thought. "Here's to the family we've made. Here's to the future that's just beginning."